My brother-in-law waited for my husband to fall asleep and entered the room with his large, imposing tool. Good afternoon to everyone tuning into the channel Infidelity Stories. My name is Amanda, and I've finally found the courage to share my story with you. I've been dating my boyfriend, David, for just over a year. He's 26, and I'm 25. I met him at an electronic music festival. We both share a deep passion for that kind of entertainment and try to attend every event we can. In addition to our love for music festivals, we're both big fans of nature. On weekends, we enjoy going on hikes, exploring waterfalls, and discovering new places. We are adventurers at heart and find peace in the mountains, rivers, and forests. However, where our love truly blossoms is at the festivals. My boyfriend David has a brother, Michael, who is a DJ at small parties and events. My brother-in-law is quite the handsome man, well-mannered, charismatic, and popular. Everyone knows Michael, and he's a favourite in the local music scene. Now I'll let you in on a little secret. Ever since I was a young girl, I've dreamed of dating someone famous, a singer, an actor, or a model. However, that opportunity never presented itself. I know many of you might judge me for this dream, but honestly, I don't care. David is his brother's biggest fan and always tries to attend the events where Michael is performing. Naturally, I would go with him to all these shows, never missing a single one. One night, after one of Michael's incredible performances, David and I headed backstage to congratulate him. When we reached the door of his dressing room, we were greeted with a warm, tight hug from him. Inside, a few friends were already celebrating with Michael. We joined the conversation, which flowed easily among us, filled with laughs and stories. In the midst of our chat, David suggested an idea: to spend a weekend camping at a site a few miles outside the city. Everyone seemed excited, especially Michael. We all agreed and planned to meet the next day at Michael's house. As the day arrived, we gathered early, heading to the supermarket together to grab everything we'd need. Meats, bread, salads, snacks, and of course plenty of drinks. We wanted to ensure we had everything for a perfect barbecue in the great outdoors. With the car packed full of bags and supplies, we returned to Michael's house to organize everything. After arranging the essentials in the car, we set off for the campsite. The road trip was filled with laughter and lively conversations, as we all eagerly anticipated the fun-filled weekend ahead. When we finally reached the campsite, we were amazed by the natural beauty surrounding us. The area was vast, covered with trees, rivers, and waterfalls nearby. The sound of flowing water and birds singing created a calm, peaceful atmosphere. We found a good spot near the river to set up our tents and began preparing for our barbecue. Michael parked the car in a secluded area, hidden from the rest of the campers. The sun was shining, and I decided to change into my swimsuit to take advantage of the weather and the nearby rivers. I grabbed some sunscreen and went looking for David to help me apply it, but I couldn't find him anywhere. So I turned to Michael and asked him for help. He immediately agreed, and as his hand started to spread the sunscreen on my back, I felt something different. Michael's touch was firm yet soft, gentle in a way that was new and unexpected. His hands lingered slightly, making me feel a strange mix of surprise and curiosity. After he finished applying the sunscreen, I turned quickly to thank him, but as I did, I noticed something startling, a noticeable bulge in his shorts. I was caught off guard. It was large, and it seemed like something had clearly excited him. The situation left me flustered, but I tried to keep my composure, pretending as if nothing had happened. As the day wore on and everyone enjoyed themselves, the energy of the group began to fade. Some friends went off to sleep, while others wandered around the campsite. Feeling restless, I decided to head into my tent to grab some mosquito repellent. When I entered, I saw David sleeping peacefully. I, however, wasn't ready for sleep yet and decided to step outside for some fresh air. As I exited the tent, I saw Michael standing alone by the barbecue, scrolling through his phone. The quiet of the night, combined with the soft light of the campfire, created a serene atmosphere. His presence felt oddly comforting, and I found myself drawn to him, craving a light-hearted conversation. We decided to take a walk around the campsite, with our conversation flowing naturally. As we walked, the mood between us started to shift, growing more intimate with each step. When we reached the area near the campsite's bathrooms, the conversation took a more personal turn, and the tension between us escalated. Suddenly, Michael stopped, looked at me, and without thinking, we kissed. It was an intense, unexpected kiss that quickly deepened into something more. Sensing the need for privacy, we entered one of the bathroom stalls. The isolation of the place allowed us to explore our emotions with a raw intensity. After we left the bathroom, there was a strange sense of lightness, but also confusion about what had just transpired between us. We returned to the campsite, trying to act normal, but everything had changed. The rest of the night was filled with guilt and racing thoughts as I tried to process what had happened and how it would affect my life and my relationship. The next morning, the air between Michael and me was noticeably colder. He avoided eye contact, acting as if I didn't exist. His sudden distance left me anxious. I kept discreetly watching him, trying to decipher whether he was feeling guilty or just ignoring me. He behaved like one of those men who lose interest after they get what they want. This worried and confused me deeply, and I feared that he might tell David everything. Every time the two brothers spoke, my heart raced, terrified that Michael would reveal our secret. We spent the entire day at the campsite, participating in the planned activities with our friends, but my mind was elsewhere. Whenever our eyes met, I saw nothing but indifference in Michael's gaze, which hurt deeply. What had happened the night before now felt like a distant dream, and I was left struggling with guilt and uncertainty. When it was finally time to pack up and head back to the city, I seized a moment when Michael was alone, loading some bags into the car. I approached him, my heart pounding. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my anxiety. He continued packing without looking at me. "There's nothing to talk about," he replied coldly. "Please, Michael, I need to understand what's going on." "Are you going to tell your brother?" I pressed, feeling my chest tighten with fear. Finally, he stopped and looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. "I'm not going to tell him anything," he said with a tone that left no room for doubt. "What happened stays between us, but don't expect me to act like nothing happened." His words, though reassuring in one sense, offered no comfort. His indifference was like a silent punishment. I walked away with a lump in my throat, my head spinning with chaotic thoughts. The ride back to the city was filled with laughter and conversation, but I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind was miles away, weighed down by guilt and the fear of being found out. Michael, sitting in the front seat beside his brother, never once looked back. When we finally reached the city, each of us went our separate ways. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I returned home, but deep down, I knew that things would never be the same. The dynamics between Michael and me had shifted irrevocably, and it left me feeling uneasy. My relationship with David was still intact, but there was a dark cloud hanging over it, one that only I could see. Days turned into weeks, and I tried my best to put the incident behind me. David, as always, was sweet and completely oblivious to the tension that had built up between his brother and me. He continued to express his love for me in every possible way, making me feel cherished and valued. But the guilt never left me. Every time I saw Michael at a party or event, his cold indifference felt like a knife twisting in my gut. He acted as if I were invisible, and while part of me was relieved that he hadn't told David about what had happened, his complete lack of acknowledgement hurt more than I wanted to admit. Months later, David did something that shook me to my core. He proposed. He had planned a romantic evening just for the two of us at one of our favorite restaurants in town. After a candlelit dinner filled with laughter and sweet moments, he took my hand and, with a nervous smile, got down on one knee. "Amanda, you're the love of my life. You've been with me through everything, and I can't imagine spending the rest of my life without you. Will you marry me?" Time seemed to stop as I stared down at him. His eyes were filled with love and sincerity, and for a moment I forgot about the guilt, the betrayal, and everything that had happened with Michael. But as soon as I opened my mouth to answer, the memories came flooding back. The night in the campsite, the kiss by the bathroom, the way Michael had touched me. My stomach churned with a mix of guilt and fear. How could I marry David knowing what I had done? How could I say yes while carrying the weight of this awful secret? Yet, looking into his hopeful eyes, I couldn't bear to hurt him. With a trembling voice, I whispered, "Yes," and watched as his face lit up with joy. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tight, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. In the days that followed, I was consumed by conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I loved David. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was kind, patient, supportive, and completely devoted to me. But on the other hand, the guilt of what had happened with Michael weighed heavily on me. Every time I looked at the engagement ring on my finger, it felt like a symbol of my deceit. And then something else happened, something I wasn't prepared for. Michael and I had managed to avoid each other at most events since the camping trip. But one night, at a party, our paths crossed again in a way that left me completely shaken. It was another electronic music festival. David and I had gone with our usual group of friends, including Michael. The night was wild, as always. The pulsating beats, the flashing lights, and the intoxicating energy of the crowd had me feeling alive in a way that only these festivals could. I was drinking more than usual, the alcohol fueling the euphoria of the night. David was off somewhere with his friends, caught up in their own world, and I found myself lost in the music, dancing with reckless abandon. It wasn't long before a stranger caught my eye. He was tall, handsome, and exuded a certain confidence that reminded me of David. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the night went on, we ended up dancing closer and closer. His hands found their way to my waist, and before I knew it, we were pressed against each other, moving to the rhythm of the music. My head was spinning, both from the alcohol and the thrill of being in the moment. Then it happened. In the heat of the moment, our lips met, and I found myself kissing this stranger with an intensity that surprised even me. His hands roamed my body, and I didn't stop him. The lights, the music, the alcohol, it all blurred together, and for those few minutes, I forgot about everything. I forgot about David, I forgot about the guilt, and I forgot about the consequences. All that mattered was the rush of the moment. We slipped away from the crowd, finding a secluded corner of the venue where the music was a distant hum. My mind was foggy, and my body was acting on impulse. Before I knew it, we were involved in yet another act of betrayal. It all happened so fast, and in my drunken haze, it felt like a dream, a hazy, surreal dream that I couldn't stop. The next morning, the reality of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. The hangover from the alcohol was nothing compared to the hangover of guilt that consumed me. I couldn't even look at David without feeling like I was drowning in shame. I had done it again. I had betrayed him again. This time, the guilt was unbearable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. How could I marry David now, knowing that I had not only cheated on him once, but twice? And worse yet, I couldn't even blame Michael or anyone else. This time, it was all on me. I spent days agonizing over what to do. Should I come clean and confess everything to David, risking the end of our relationship? Or should I bury this secret deep inside and try to move on, hoping that it would never come to light? Every time I thought about it, my heart ached. I didn't want to lose him. I loved him more than anything, but how could I live with myself knowing what I had done? And then there was the proposal. David had asked me to marry him, to spend the rest of our lives together. He had no idea that I was hiding this dark, terrible secret from him. The weight of that secret was crushing me, and I didn't know how much longer I could carry it. I needed advice. I needed to hear from others, people who might have been through something similar or could offer me guidance on what to do. Should I confess to David and risk losing him forever, or should I accept his proposal and try to leave the past behind? even though the guilt was eating me alive. I'm lost, and I don't know what the right decision is. Please, if you've been in a situation like this, help me find a way forward. What should I do? Should I come clean and face the consequences? Or should I keep this secret and try to move on with my life? The story is not over yet. Please consider subscribe. After that second betrayal, I found myself sinking deeper into an emotional abyss. Days turned into sleepless nights, and the weight of my secret threatened to suffocate me. The guilt gnawed at me relentlessly, like a persistent shadow I couldn't shake. Every time I was with David, my heart ached. He was always so attentive, so loving, so perfect, completely unaware that the woman he planned to marry had betrayed him not once, but twice. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had always dreamed of a fairy tale romance, one where I would marry a man who loved me unconditionally, a man who would stand by me no matter what. David was that man. But in my twisted reality, I was the one who had betrayed the sanctity of our relationship, not once but twice. And with two different men. One was his own brother, and the other a faceless stranger whose name I couldn't even remember. Every day was a battle to maintain the facade of normalcy. I would wake up next to David, his arm draped around me protectively, and the wave of shame would crash over me. I would spend hours staring at my reflection in the mirror, wondering how I had let things get this far. How could I have risked everything? Was it thrill-seeking? Was it some deep-seated dissatisfaction I hadn't admitted to myself? Or was it simply that I wasn't the woman David thought I was? The engagement had thrown my entire life into disarray. David was ecstatic, telling everyone about our upcoming wedding. He would excitedly show off the engagement ring he had given me, and every time he did, my stomach churned with guilt. The wedding was scheduled for next year in 2025, and every conversation about the future only intensified the knot in my chest. It didn't help that Michael continued to be a looming presence in our lives. Despite the cold distance he had maintained after the camping trip, we still saw each other frequently at parties, family gatherings, and events. Every time we were in the same room, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. He never acknowledged what had happened between us, and yet there was a silent understanding that it had irrevocably changed everything. One night, at a family dinner, Michael sat directly across from me. David was sitting next to me, chatting animatedly with their parents, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. As I listened to the conversation, I could feel Michael's eyes on me. It wasn't the same cold indifference as before. It was something different. His gaze was calculating, as if he were testing me, waiting for me to crack under the pressure. The tension was unbearable. Every clink of a fork against a plate felt like a gunshot in the deafening silence between Michael and me. I could barely eat, my appetite destroyed by the anxiety coursing through me. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom, where I leaned against the sink trying to steady my breathing. What was happening to me? Why couldn't I shake this? Was it guilt that kept Michael on my mind, or was it something else? I hated myself for even considering the possibility that I might still be drawn to him. The way he had looked at me, the way his touch had lingered on my skin, it haunted me in ways I couldn't explain. As the months dragged on, I tried everything to push Michael out of my thoughts. I threw myself into planning the wedding with David, trying to focus on the future we were building together. We visited venues, discussed guest lists, and even started thinking about where we wanted to go for our honeymoon. Every time I smiled at David and talked about our future, I felt like a fraud. I was living a lie, and the more I tried to convince myself that I could move past it, the more the guilt consumed me. But the situation with Michael was far from resolved. One night, David and I attended another party where Michael was DJing. The music was loud, the lights were flashing, and the crowd was wild as usual. David was off chatting with some friends, leaving me alone near the bar. I watched as Michael commanded the crowd from the DJ booth, his charisma drawing everyone's attention. I tried to focus on the music, but all I could think about was the night we shared at the campsite, the memory of that kiss, the way his hands had moved over my body. It all came rushing back, overwhelming me with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. I hated myself for thinking about it, but I couldn't help it. There was something about Michael that lingered in my mind like a dangerous addiction. Suddenly, as if sensing my gaze, Michael looked up from the DJ booth and met my eyes. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The music, the crowd, the lights, it all faded into the background. His eyes locked onto mine and I felt a familiar tension coil in my stomach. He held my gaze for a few seconds longer than necessary before turning his attention back to the crowd. But the damage had been done. My heart was racing, my mind swirling with thoughts I didn't want to have. After his set, Michael made his way to the bar. I knew I should have walked away, avoided any interaction with him, but my feet seemed to be rooted to the spot. He approached me casually, as if nothing had ever happened between us, but there was an edge to his smile, a knowing glint in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "You look tense," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. Still thinking about that night, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much that night had affected me, but the truth was, I hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied, "It was a mistake, Michael, we both know that." He leaned in slightly, his lips brushing against my ear as he whispered, "Was it? Or are you just afraid of what it means?" I pulled back, my heart pounding in my chest. What was he trying to do? Was this some kind of game to him? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, David appeared, completely unaware of the tension between his brother and me. He draped his arm around my shoulders, smiling brightly. "Hey babe, you okay?" he asked, kissing my cheek affectionately. I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine, just getting a drink." Michael gave a casual nod and walked away, leaving me standing there with David, my heart still racing. I wanted to tell him the truth in that moment. I wanted to confess everything, to unburden myself from the guilt that was eating me alive. But I couldn't. Not there. Not like that. As the weeks passed, the tension between Michael and me only grew. It was like we were locked in a silent battle, each of us unwilling to confront what had happened, but also unable to fully move on. He would continue to act indifferent most of the time, but then there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, where his gaze would linger a little too long, or his words would carry a hidden meaning that only I could understand. And then came the final straw. One night, at yet another party, things escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was late, and the alcohol had loosened everyone's inhibitions. David was once again off with his friends, leaving me alone by the fire pit outside. Michael found me there, and for the first time in months, he didn't bother with pretense. "You need to make a choice, Amanda," he said bluntly, his voice low and serious. "You can't keep living like this. You can't have both of us." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. I stepped closer, his eyes burning with intensity. "You know what I'm talking about. You can't marry David and keep pretending that nothing happened between us. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to you." I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. He was right, of course. I couldn't keep pretending, but the thought of losing David, the man who loved me so deeply, was unbearable. I didn't want to hurt him, but how could I marry him knowing what I had done? How could I walk down the aisle with this secret hanging over me? "Michael, I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not telling you to choose me," he said softly. "I'm just telling you to be honest. If you love him, you owe him the truth. He deserves better than this." His words cut deep, and I realized that Michael was right. David deserved better. He deserved someone who could give him their whole heart, not someone who was hiding behind lies and guilt. But could I really confess everything and risk losing him forever? I didn't have an answer. And so there I was, standing by the fire pit, staring into Michael's eyes, feeling the weight of his words crush down on me. The flames flickered between us, casting shadows on our faces, but the intensity in his gaze was unmistakable. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight as if the truth was lodged there, waiting to break free. Michael was right. I had to make a choice. But how could I choose when every path seemed to lead to heartbreak? If I told David the truth, I risked destroying the man I loved, ruining the relationship we had built over the past year. But if I didn't tell him, I would continue living with this unbearable guilt, knowing that I had betrayed the person who trusted me the most. My hands trembled as I looked down, unable to meet Michael's piercing gaze any longer. He didn't push me, he just stood there waiting for me to process everything, to come to terms with the inevitable. The fire crackled softly in the background, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside my heart. "I don't know if I can do this," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. Michael sighed, stepping closer to me, his voice softer now. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy, Amanda, but lying to him, it's only going to make things worse in the long run." His words stung because I knew he was right, but the thought of confessing everything made me feel sick. How could I look into David's eyes and tell him that not only had I slept with his brother, but I had also betrayed him again with a stranger at a party? It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern, a reflection of something deeper that I hadn't been willing to confront until now. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. I needed to figure out what I was going to do. But I couldn't think straight with Michael standing so close, with his presence reminding me of everything that had happened between us. I mumbled something about needing space and walked away, leaving him by the fire pit, staring after me. For the next few days, I tried to avoid Michael as much as possible, which wasn't easy given that we ran in the same social circles. But what made everything worse was that David started noticing my behavior. He could tell that something was off, that I was distant, distracted. He asked me a few times if everything was okay, and every time I forced a smile and assured him that I was just stressed from work or tired from all the wedding planning. But the lie weighed heavier with every passing day, and so did the fear. Fear that I would eventually break, that the truth would slip out in some careless moment of weakness. Fear that I would lose David forever. And fear that I wasn't the woman I had always believed myself to be, that maybe, deep down, I wasn't capable of the kind of love and commitment that David deserved. One evening, after yet another tense family dinner where Michael and I exchanged furtive glances, David finally confronted me. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, but my mind was miles away. I didn't even notice when David paused the movie until I felt him shift beside me. When I looked over at him, he was staring at me with a concerned expression. "Amanda," he began softly. "What's going on? You've been distant lately. Is it the wedding? Are you having doubts?" My heart lurched in my chest. I hadn't expected him to bring it up so directly, and for a moment, I was at a complete loss for words. Should I tell him now? Should I confess everything and let the chips fall where they may? The thought of losing him was unbearable, but so was the thought of continuing to live this lie. I swallowed hard, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. I don't know," I finally admitted, my voice trembling. "It's not the wedding exactly, it's just, I've been feeling overwhelmed." David frowned, his eyes searching mine. "Overwhelmed by what? You can talk to me, Amanda. Whatever it is, we can work through it together." His words were like a dagger to my heart. He was so kind, so understanding, and yet I was the one who had betrayed him. How could I possibly tell him the truth now? How could I destroy everything we had built together? I took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to speak. "I love you, David, I really do, but there's something I need to tell you." His expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "What is it?" The words were on the tip of my tongue. I was right there, standing on the edge of the truth, ready to dive in. But then, the fear gripped me again, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't break his heart like that. "It's nothing," I said quickly, forcing a smile. I think I've just been stressing myself out about the wedding. Maybe I need a break from all the planning. David looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not to believe me. Finally, he nodded, though I could see the lingering doubt in his eyes. Okay, if you need a break, we can take one. You don't have to do everything at once. I nodded, grateful for the out he had given me. But as the night went on, the guilt only grew worse. I had lied to him again. I had let the moment pass, and now the secret felt even heavier, like a ticking time bomb that could go off at any moment. A few weeks later, everything came to a head. It was David's birthday, and we had thrown a big party at our apartment. All of our friends were there, including Michael, who had offered to DJ for the night. The party was lively, with music pumping, people dancing, and drinks flowing freely. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. I tried to focus on David, on celebrating his special day. But every time I caught a glimpse of Michael behind the DJ booth, my stomach twisted in knots. He hadn't spoken to me much since our conversation by the fire pit, but there was still an unspoken tension between us that hung in the air like a dark cloud. As the night wore on and more people started to leave, David pulled me aside, wrapping his arms around me and kissing me on the forehead. "I'm the luckiest guy in the world," he said, his voice full of warmth and affection. "I don't know what I did to deserve you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I didn't deserve him, not after everything I had done. The guilt was suffocating me, and I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I had to tell him the truth, no matter the consequences. "David," I began, my voice shaking, "there's something I need to—" But before I could finish, the doorbell rang. It was one of David's friends, returning to grab something he had left behind. The moment was lost, and once again, I was left with the weight of my unspoken confession. That night, after everyone had left and David had fallen asleep, I lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep hiding behind this lie. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, when deep down, I was falling apart. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to tell David the truth, once and for all. It was time to face the consequences of my actions, no matter how painful they might be. As I prepared myself for the conversation that would change everything, my heart raced with fear and dread. But I knew that it was the only way forward. I couldn't marry him with this secret hanging over us. I couldn't start a life with him while carrying the weight of my betrayal. And so, with my heart in my throat, I sat down with David that afternoon, took a deep breath and began to speak. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Michael and about me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've enjoyed this real-life tale of infidelity, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like the video. We post new stories every day.